It started out with an idea to make a documentary.
Now, with over 60 interviews completed and more to record, it's time to listen fully.
These are the stories from those who experienced the Young Religious Unitarian Universalist program.
All right, we ready? Yeah. All right. So, I want to say hi, Dawn. I love you. It's so nice to see you. So, my name is Aileen McConnell, is what a lot of people know me as in the Why Are You world. And so you can find me under Aileen O'Connor McConnell Dashurova, because why wouldn't I have a lot of last names? Because we all transition and we all change and we all grow. So there's a lot of identities in there. Currently, I travel between Nantucket Island, Westford, Massachusetts, and the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And two of those locations, I have an energy medicine practice that I've had for 27 years. So that's what I'm doing now, and I love it. I started my involvement with youth work in Nantucket. I got involved in the Second Congregational Meeting House on Nantucket. And the reason I got involved is because I had two little children, two daughters, and I did not want to raise them with some of the heaviness, some of the things I didn't believe in with the religion that I was brought up in. So I did a little search. And interestingly enough, even though there are a lot of denominations on Nantucket Island, the first one I went to was a UU church. And when I walked into the church just to look, the principles were posted. And I looked at them and I said, wow, there's nothing there I don't support. There's absolutely nothing in those principles in the living traditions that I am opposed to or find I have to modify my beliefs or explain my kids away from. So the first congregation I went to, the first in picking and choosing, was a UU church on Nantucket. And I went with a friend of mine who was also searching for her children. And one of the funniest things, which I've come to love, but at the time, I thought for sure lightning was going to strike me. I thought, these people are crazy. They don't really know that this is not okay. The service is happening. It's wonderful. I'm engaged, getting a good feeling. And then announcements happen in the middle of the service. And I'm like, announcements? And some woman jumps up and says, after church today, come over to my house and I have a volleyball net and we're gonna have a picnic and have volleyball. And I was aghast. I just was like, I both find this inviting and horrible. Like, this is church. You know, there's where I was like, is God okay with this? I mean, this is God time. And we're talking about playing and building community and like hanging, I mean, ugh. And then in Nantucket, I never grew up with coffee hour. In Nantucket, there's coffee hour, and this is winter time, so it was a big, beautiful old church, and down below was a smaller version because it was winter, so we're in there. And then we went back to what was called the Red Room. Okay, don't go to any movies about that. It was called the Red Room, as a red carpet. So we're like, angling through to this little room. I don't know why this was the thing on Nantucket, no idea. But this is what we had at coffee hour there. Ritz crackers and hot bouillon. And they had old teacups out. So my first introduction to coffee hour at UU Church was like just Ritz crackers and like bouillon getting poured out of a teacup into, a tea, like, you know, very, into these cups. Now, my daughter, Megan, loved it. That was like her favorite thing. She couldn't find it. I was like, this is weird. And yet I went back. And then I went back. And then one of my sweetest for sure moments was, it was Easter time was coming up. And during the announcements, the director of religious education, Janet Emick, said, she made an announcement and said, we're doing our Easter play and there are still roles that are open for anyone who would like to be in it. And Megan was little and she was like, she kind of wanted to be in it. It was going to involve maybe a costume or whatever. And this was the week before. And I called Janet up on the phone and I said, we're new. And my daughter, Megan, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 at the time, would like to be in the play. And I was ready to hear like, no, she doesn't practice. I was ready. And Janet said, absolutely, da, da, da. And so here it is, Easter. My little daughter's up there, happy as a clam with these other kids just doing whatever they're doing. And there's all these flowers out. We can take flowers home. And I was just like, yes, this is where we belong. This is where we belong. So we had bouillon and Ritz crackers for a lot of years. And then, of course, I was like, oh, you need religious education teachers? Right on. And everything I saw, everything there matched what it is that I wanted for my children. And I was very clear on what I wanted for my children. And my children went to their little big daycare with wooden baskets. I would not buy them lunchboxes that were made of plastic. They had to go with wooden baskets. I was like, these are my babies. They're my responsibility. And I want to give them the best, most nourishing for them and the planet life experience. Like, I took it very seriously. So I very seriously took their religious, spiritual community. And that's, it was a perfect match for a lot of reasons. So along the way, so we're a couple years into this, it's great. Our minister's great. Everything's great. The youth advisor said to me one day, Aileen, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to divinity school. And we have this little pool of young, girls in the teenage girls, youth, who we've started a youth group. I don't want to leave them. I think you would be great at doing it. And I was like, oh, this sounds great. Love it. I'll do it. So then we met a couple times, and then they're telling me there's a con and we've got to go. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then the DRA at the time, Janet, they had hosted one, I guess like a year before I got involved. And so I'm hearing all about like how great it is. So I'm getting this, okay, cool. And I'd also been going off island to DRE and religious education workshops. So I met people, I'm getting involved. And for us to go off island at that point, it was a 2.5-hour boat ride. Like 2.5 hours off. It was a big commitment to then rent a car and go. Always worth it. Met some really beautiful, wonderful people. So then I went to my first con. I can't remember what church floor I slept on at that point. It was great. We had, I think, the 4 youth that were in the group, so we're on the boat, and we go, and I was blown away, excited, and it was mysterious and weird because as a youth advisor, we had to sign up for times to walk around, make sure everybody was, following the rules, all that kind of stuff. So that was like a whole new thing, like, oh, these are a bunch of people, I don't know these people, and I gotta make sure they're following the rules, and what are the rules, and then like awkwardly meeting new, and then knowing myself enough to know I'm not gonna be the person that wants to be woken up at 4 to do my walk around rounds. So I would always try to get in and get that shift to stay awake until like 2 or 3 in the morning, which now, as I'm saying this and thinking about it, it really was the best times because youth were jazzed up, they were still awake. And I found that those were the times that they wanted to talk the most about important things. Because then people would start falling asleep at 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning. So unbeknownst to me at the time, and a revelation in this moment, those were, I think, that timing was the best time at cons to really get to talk to people and have some one-on-one or, 3 youth and me hanging out in the kitchen or something. So that's how it all started for me to get involved in this very magical, very important, sincere, and raw, heart raw experience for youth is that's kind of actually how I would describe it right now, thinking about it. It was just youth who somehow knew enough to meet one another in these spaces. You know, they knew enough to know that this was some important experience for them in that moment to make it through high school, as well as sort of a seed of how they, foundation and a seed for how they wanted to grow into their worlds, their lives, for their futures. And I'm thinking about how I often hear people say, I'm looking for my tribe. I'm trying to find my tribe. And when I say tribal, it's not only just looking for the tribe and finding the tribe, even in the chaos and the worldliness of hormones and growing up and stress and all of that. It was also tribal. The image I'm getting is, you know, the rhythm and the dancing and the image of coming together to sharing a pulse, wanting to come together in a pulse that, when you think about shaman work or any of that, it's bringing almost into a trance state of high vibration, of trying together to reach this divine place and knowing without maybe speaking it, but sometimes speaking it, that that's what it was, to come together, to share a rhythm in synergy to reach something higher and more fulfilling. I loved all of it, even the hardest moments, right? And the hardest moments were rules getting broken or trying to help navigate, right? Usually, honestly, between youth and other adults, right? Youth did pretty well with one another, but not to say there wasn't some, right, skills that needed to come forth in moments. One of the things I was thinking about in preparing my memory, jogging my memory, I was a part of the transition of the youth advisor's position and integration with the youth. So by that I mean, when I first started, we would play Wink, which is a game that has a lot of touch to it, right? So Wink is someone's in the middle of this big circle, and there is one person in the middle, then there's an inner circle and an outer circle. And the point of the game is the inner circle is trying to get to the person in the middle, and the outer circle is trying to like tackle them so they don't get to the person in the middle. We, as advisors, the concept, it had a lot of like this coming from the 70s vibe. We're like, oh, you know, we're all hanging out. And there was this concept that the more engaged we are and we meet the youth with them and understand them, the better it will be. So we played Wink. Sometimes there were, I mean, it's going to sound weirder and creepier than it is, there were like massage circles, right? But that just meant like everyone's got their clothes on. You're just like cross-legged in a circle, all facing the same way. And you're just doing a little boop, 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 you know, oh, blah, 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 and saying something cool. And like, and so we all, as advisors, as adults, for the most part, did it. And it was the advisors who kind of like got like, yeah, like we'll get our knees dirty and get involved, were the ones that like youth were like, this is cool, yeah. And then probably a couple years in, it was like, I think we should not do that, because it came down to touch. Not only because it can be a tough setup for inappropriate adults who don't understand the boundaries, but also it was like, oh, maybe that's not what we're supposed to do. And it was really actually great and cool, and it was an awakening moment. Whereas adults, we said, no, we're not going to do that game. Oh, even the one where everybody's, because it was a lot of community building games, right? And there was the one where everybody stands up again facing, and then you all sit it down at the same time to try to sit. And we were like, no, we can't do those anymore. We understood it, the adults that I worked with, we understood it, and we believed that that was appropriate and better not to do that. So that was good. In my circle of adult advisors, there was no pushback, there was nothing. We were like, oh, and the youth seemed to be totally fine with it. And I think it was probably maybe also during a generational transition time anyway, where it was like, oh, the youth that where that culture had aged out, and somehow I think the timing was probably just perfect that newer youth were coming in. We were like, beep. So I was thinking about that. That was an interesting change and a wise change. And no nothing wrong with what it was before. It just needed to be something different. It was good. At first I didn't know how tired I would get, like that first con, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm sleeping on a floor in a sleeping bag. But then, and then it just wasn't what it was. When we were coming back on the boat, because it's Nantucket, but it would be true if you were driving. I guess, we're on the boat, and all my youth from the first conference, they're lying on they're out, and I'm like this. I must be alert. I'm in charge of them. Okay, as soon as I get home, So that was like a whole idea of what does it mean to be what we might have said in charge of, or accountable to, or responsible for. And what does that look like? I found that to me anyway, I felt like I was a much better mother because I did youth work, because y'all broke me in before I had my kids. And that way, stuff that I might have been like emotionally all like attached with my kids, like, it starts like, oh no, I know this. I know this. I don't have to I've been through this. I can put it in perspective because it was with other people's kids that I had to go through it. So with mine, I was like a little more. It was really wonderful. It was a great line where I felt a part of, yet also knowing and feeling really good that I was an observer. So it was like, and I was an observer participant. And I loved that because it wasn't my conference, it was the youth's conference. And I was welcomed in to be a part of their journey and their growth, which was so beautiful and painful and out of control exciting, and also deeply horrible. And it was like, yeah. So being there and being present, I think now, again, in this moment, another revelation, I think I learned to be neutral, which, by the way, I use in my energy medicine practice. And I try to use in my life, to be a neutral place that doesn't spiral into, right, the energy of others, but rather holds an alignment, so that helps to be the observer and also helps the moment to unfold the way it's supposed to unfold, as opposed to getting in and constructing or navigating it. I thought that was really great with youth adult committees. Now, I was a youth advisor for a congregation, and I was a youth advisor at Star Island. I was a youth advisor at Ferry Beach. I did a little guest stint at Roe. I was on youth adult committees, and it was really intriguing and educational and important just for me as a person to be a part of each of these committees and groups and how they decided to run differently. So for example, Star Island was a religious education week. So it was religious educators with their children. So what I did with the co-advisors, we created a program, which was such a blast, right? We came at it with all these cool things. And so that was a religious education, adult created experience, yet also youth input was involved. So over the years with the youth going into the summer, into the week, I might talk to some of the youth about, so what are you looking for like this? What is really important to you? And then I would talk to George Thompson, who was one of my longtime co-advisors, and I'd say, okay, this is really important, or blah, blah, blah. So we would deeply consider what the youth wanted to experience. And then it felt like our role was to offer that opportunity and let it fly where it needed to fly, with a little bit of structure. And then at Ferry Beach, it was a youth adult committee, very strongly youth led. And that was a little like, okay, all right. And also a different setup because Star Island is an island, and everybody that comes on, so that was probably a good way to start with Star Island. And then Ferry Beach, speaking of how is it to be an advisor, Teen Life Issues, one Teen Life Issues week. Ferry Beach is not an island. It is in Maine, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and anybody can find their way onto the campus and onto the beaches near there. So one night, I was supposed to be the advisor asleep, having a little sleep time, and yet the other advisor who was supposed to be on duty was not to be found, because that can happen too. And some drunk youth were banging on my door at 2-ish in the morning, and they said, "There's a problem at the beach." So I was like, adrenaline running, ready for any problem at the beach. And when I got down there, there were some much older men on motorcycles, much older than the youth, and they were offering alcohol and drinking with some of the youth. So I was by myself, and no cell phones existed at that time. And so luckily I am very fiery. Luckily I don't pay attention to certain things. So I had to make it very clear to a bunch of biker dudes who were men who were trying to party with some high school Teen Life Issues youth that they needed to get out of there immediately and what was wrong with them. And then I needed to scoop up our youth, tell them to go to bed, and we would circle up a little later in the morning. So there have been moments like that. And I will say never really bothered me, because I was a youth. And I certainly could have been circled up in the morning opportunities if, you know. So that's just growth and development. That's it, right? I will say I don't ever remember coming across any youth who really was like so off the charts disrespectful, or it didn't happen. It didn't happen. You know, everybody's brains work differently. Everybody has different conditioning. So sometimes, again, there was some navigating that needed to happen. Sometimes, rarely. And we're talking about like lots of years worth and lots of different locations. Sometimes I'd have to like a little head to head, right? And doing it in a way that was not disrespectful, which is interesting to say, like, I respect you enough that I'm going to speak up to you about this because it's a problem, and I'm happy to tell you how I see it as kind of a problem to community, potentially for you, how this could come back at you, and I'm really, I got your back, and because I have your back, I trust your intelligence and our relationship enough to tell this to you. On occasion had to do that. I did the Religious Education Week, and yes, then I was asked to be an advisor on Star at YRUU Week, yes. And it was nice because they were both together. So I'm like, cool, I get to, everyone else, see you later on the boat, but I get to stay on Star Island another week. And yes, it was a little challenging. So again, a lot of the youth I had met over the years through different programs and different conferences and things like that. Yeah, we'll just say it. Sex was always an interesting thing that would come up. I think I'm going to jump to Ferry Beach for a minute, and then we'll jump back to YRUU. So Ferry Beach, Teen Life Issues, there were youth chaplains chosen. So there was a youth adult committee, so youth and adults, who talked about what the week was going to look like, what activities were going to happen. So we say that's really youth run. And chaplains were chosen, a male and a female chaplain, to be the people that problems would come to and all that. And I learned my first year at Teen Life Issues that the youth chaplains also were the ones that had the condoms. I also was an OWL teacher, and through, even in college, I did peer sex education. So I've been a sexuality educator this whole time, which was helpful, very helpful. So there were a lot of times where a poker face could come out with ease when information was coming at me, which is helpful, rather than like, what? Yeah. So one of the things that I suggested and brought to light in conversation for Teen Life Issues Week is when one of the youth chaplains, the female youth chaplain, and I guess it was a tradition that we would go to the sex shop in Portland, Maine, and get condoms. Because it was always no sex, because it's exclusive behavior. And that's kind of how it stood when I first started doing youth. It was like, well, it's exclusive, so you don't do it, because then you're pairing up with somebody and we want you to be part of community. And we're also trying not to condone that this is a big, sex orgy experience. So she and I went and got the condoms, and I had a moment where I was kind of asking, learning, like, okay, so how does this work? Because we certainly didn't do that on Star Island for Religious Education Week. So I was like, okay, here's a culture. That's the thing. When you're coming in as an adult, I want to know what the culture is. I'm not coming in to like bash the system and make it be what I think. And that's how we ran into a bunch of breakdowns. It's more like, what is this culture? I'm a part of this culture. How do I be myself? And share and be a part of a culture that I'm, again, also observing and witnessing, right? So as she and I were driving, I said, well, how does this work? I'm not familiar with this. How does it work? So we buy condoms. How do they get the condoms? Because we have already in orientation, don't have sex, but if you're going to use a condom. I said, how do they get it? And she said, well, someone will just come up and get one. I'm like, well, so one person will get one? I mean, and I was very candid, as you might know, Dawn, because you have to be candid to get to the point. I said, so, I mean, is this people that are masturbating, so they need a condom for masturbating? Because if only one person is coming, then are they the only person in agreement that's having sex? Like, I'm not really sure. And so she laughed and I laughed, and I said, because I'm thinking, here's sort of like a thing, like, are people getting condoms thinking they're gonna set somebody up to have sex with them? I mean, if it's a consensual agreement, shouldn't both people come? Like, so if two people agree ahead of time that they want to have sex with each other, I'm thinking they both come to ask for a condom. And again, this is the part of like so much brilliance in youth. And like, I could just see her, she's like, oh, wow, right. I was like, I mean, is that, I don't know. She's like, yes. So we talked about that and got excited and hung out in the sex shop and got the condoms and everything. And when we went back, she told the other youth chaplain, and he was a little like, and there's a part of, how do we do that? And I just really appreciate, she was gung-ho. When we did orientation, she said it. She was like on it. She said, here's the thing, you're not supposed to be. And this is not, one person just can't come up and get a condom, because that, we're talking about consensual. We're talking about, she did a beautiful job. I mean, everyone pretty freaked out. They were like, no, we're not really ready for that. Like, I think she's hot and I'm gonna like target her and try to convince her to have sex with me. I was like, yeah, no, we can't do that. Like, no. So that was like a really cool moment and experience. And that happened at Teen Life Issues. And then Why Are You? My first year going into, it's just like amazing now that I'm reminding you of this. So my first year going into it, again, that one was a really strongly youth run. And we met, I think, 2 times prior to the week. We met in different spots and had like a whole weekends, like sleepover. And again, I was very much an observer, very welcomed and appreciated. And but definitely like this whole, and so when we got there, the youth committee really super on top of it, had a meeting right away. And like the first night we're in there, like, all right, look, we got this issue because there's a youth here who last year, which I was not a part of, last year, the story is that she forced this younger youth to have sex, this younger guy to have sex with her. And they're both here. And when you're a youth advisor, you're like, bring it, I'm ready, I'm just, all right. And that's the one thing I love. When it's on the table, it's on the table. Doesn't get any better than that, right? It's on the table. So, and there was no problems with anybody ever bringing anything and putting it on the table. And that's your magic, right? So, so I'm thinking, okay, this is good. Let me hear. I'd like to hear more about this. So, okay, so that's my part. Like, oh, okay, I don't really, yeah. So, fill me in, and they did. And thinking, boy, they were thinking and what, and do we meet with them again, and how do we take care of this? And so, my part as a youth advisor, just from experience in life and the things that I did, it opened up a whole conversation again about predatory behaviors. No group is exempt from predatory behaviors, right? And so and that's been threaded through all of this because we have older youth with younger youth, and not that it has to be, but there's a power dynamic and all that, right? So was it predatory? Like, what really happened, and how do we figure this out, and how do we set boundaries, and how do we have these conversations with the youth? And the other thing that I brought up, not during that situation, but at another time, we were all sitting in the snack bar section on Star Island, and we just started having this spontaneous conversation that we were all kind of there, the ones that were the youth committee and myself. And some of them were aggravated by how much sex they were noticing was happening. And I listened, and I was like, yeah, I hear that, and I totally get what you're saying, and I'm with you. What do you need from me, right? Because they were like, this is people we don't even know, like new people are coming, and they're thinking this is what we're doing, and this isn't what we're doing, and it's gotten out of hand. So they were trying to find these sort of profound pillars of why it wasn't okay. They knew it wasn't okay, but they couldn't quite articulate or come to that conclusion. And so again, as an advisor, as a sex educator for all these years and things that I've dealt with, one of the things I brought up that was this beautiful aha moment, because it's something that had happened years before at a congregation I was serving as a director of religious education. One of the youth in the program had gone to a conference, and there had been some sexual stuff that occurred, and it triggered a whole bunch of abuse memories for her. And that was a really big thing that we came together to help heal and work with her family and her and everything. So I had that experience as the adult, as the advisor, and so I was able to say, here are some things that perhaps we could think about as why it's not a good idea to have sort of random sex. And random just meaning, not to judge or dismiss that, hey, cool, sex play is fine, as long as it's consensual and all that. But in this particular situation, I shared with them, here are some things. Someone here could have a history of sexual abuse, and that will open up maybe when they get home, and then they're alone dealing with it. The community disbands. I mean, as you know, Don, we stay connected, but yet you're back in your school. You're back, homeschooled or at your school or wherever you're going or in your family. And to all of a sudden have a trauma awaken, not in community or with anyone who knew what was going on, not cool, right? Not okay. And the other thing is, like, as we all know, no birth control is 90, it's not 100%. And what happens if somebody leaves community and they're pregnant, right? Not to mention STIs and all that stuff. So And Plan B also was not readily available at that time, so it was really a big deal. So as I was sort of expressing some of those, most about when you leave community, what this can trigger for people and how this could, it was great because everyone was like, yes, thank you, great. So then they were able to create this entire, the clarity and find the words to articulate, this is why it's not okay. And so they did a really good job, kind of circling community and stressing, this is not what we're doing, and this is why. So good reflection. I always found a lot of really good reflection. One of my favorite moments of I'm just in awe of this moment. Why are you weak? There was a youth who it was his first year there. He'd never been there before. And I was seeing that people were really put off by him, right? Again, it didn't often happen, but sometimes there was youth like, ooh. So they were put off by him and people were getting angry. And then youth were complaining to the youth committee, the youth that were running it, like, what's up with this kid? And he's this and he's that and he's bossy and he did the. And I'm observing, of course, because that's like my role. And I'm like, this is interesting. And then I'm like, I think this youth might be on the autism spectrum. And it was a time when people didn't really talk about it that much. And the more I watched him, I was like, oh, he appears like a know-it-all. He appears to be constantly speaking up and like saying things that didn't flow, perhaps, right? Or more rawful, truthful in a moment, then people really were like, hey, we don't do that, whatever. And so a meeting was called to talk about it because they're like, what do we do? And some of the youth were like, I'm having a hard time with him. Like, what? And again, beautiful on the table. Great. All of you are having a hard time with this youth and you think he's rude and all of these things. And you're getting, but there's no reason to kick him off. He's not breaking a rule, right? Because when you're on an island or in a conference, there's times, hey, I'm sorry, but this is too damaging to the community, right? And we've already established that. Well, you can't, you're obnoxious, so you have to leave the conference. Call your parents, have them pick you up at the boat. Like they were all just like, what do we do? So I listened to everybody. They were so beautiful and they couldn't quite, and their honesty and their own issues. And then as the adult advisor, just with experience, right? Not a lot more wisdom or smarts, just experience, right? Accumulated experience. I said, I've been observing this too. And I'm wondering if maybe he might be, and we did call it Asperger's back then. I said, I wonder if he has Asperger's or sort of on the autism spectrum in some way. And one of the youth on the committee, all of a sudden her face just went like this. She broke into tears and she said, my brother has autism. Yes. And her melting and her honesty and her just so happening in the moment. And we all were watching and everyone was watching. And in that, just incredible, like, my brother, just freedom to immediately express it. Everyone melted. Everyone understood. Even if they didn't know autism, or they just all understood because she understood. And then they were like, yes, we can do this. We can figure this out. And then they did. They found ways to make sure they went out of their way to be with him and be inclusive. And she shared what it was like to have an autistic brother. And she was the resource. And then they all made sure he was integrated, but also helped them navigate maybe not to always be, where it was not a big success for everyone if he was in that space. They did a beautiful job.
I've learned so much through making our documentary and now launching this podcast. I'm amazed by the dedication, time, and resources it takes to bring these powerful stories to life. We couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to help us keep sharing them with the world, please visit yruu.org/donate. So again, it's yruu.org/donate. Every contribution, big or small, truly makes a difference. Thank you for being part of this journey.
So when we say this is intergenerational, are we really saying this is what the adults think the kids should do, or is this actually intergenerational? And what does that mean? One of the programs I started, and maybe it's because I love food, I don't really know, but when the church that I was serving went to 2 services, it was like, well, how do we work religious education in 2 services? So we decided the later service would stay with a curriculum-based, and we didn't know how many people would show up at the young one, the earlier service. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go with what I like and also what I think our principles are. And so I said, well, let's do a multi-age, multicultural experience. And so there was a mom that she was so great, and she homeschooled, and I knew she would just like be perfect, and she was great. I was like, hey, what do you think? And she was super into it. I said, look, so we find all these holidays, like, you know, on the timeline, right? So in the fall, there's this holiday from all these different cultures. And so any kid can come of any age. And we'll bring music in. I was thinking about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, right? Like, let's hit all these kids where their intelligences are, right? So let's get some movement and dance and activities, and we'll just like really explain it. And then almost every time at the end, we would go over to the church kitchen and we would make some food, right? So like, what is it? So the first thing I remember, we made avocado ice cream. And so I said, we'll go over and we'll make it right as church is coming out, and we can serve it at coffee hour and tell them what we've done and serve it. And so it really puts the children in this great position of having like this power and this education, and this is what we learned. And I'll tell you, it was great. It was so great. So that, to me, was an intergenerational moment where it wasn't adults being like, oh, I mean, you know, okay, we were making a mess in the kitchen. It was a blast. And the kids were trying it, and they liked it. And they could go up to an adult and say, I didn't really like this, but you might like this. And this comes from this tradition. This is what we learned about. Who are the educators? You can be a 9-year-old educator of adults. Why wouldn't you be? Right? So I think that's an interesting thing about intergenerational or shared power and respect in community. You know, not adult down. It's a shared experience. And that was sort of goes back to how much I enjoyed. I learned so much from youth. You know, what's going on? What are you doing? Even in like in an owl or whatever, I'm like, so what are the terms now? What are we saying now? Like, what does this mean? You know? Actually, I would have to ask my college age daughters, like, okay, look, I'm teaching owl again. Give me some new stuff so I'm not shocked. Tell me, what's the language? What, you got anything new? They're like, oh, Mom. So OWL is Our Whole Lives, and it's a sexuality program. There was an older program that got a little bit of negative press. And so it changed into All Her Lives, comprehensive. Love it, it's great. It started, is my understanding, for high school youth, then they expanded it. So now we teach Our Whole Lives from, I wanna say, is it first grade up? Do we have kindergarten? Yeah, kindergarten up. And it covers not just anatomy, age-appropriate anatomy, but it covers relationships. It covers the toxic side, the dark side of relationships. It covers so much. information. And I actually implement, I teach at schools, I teach at private schools, health, and I base it off of Our Whole Lives. And I also consult with schools, private schools, with their health program. And I'm like, Our Whole Lives, check it out. You might want to jump off of that. So it's a very good, very comprehensive, thoughtful program for sexuality education. Yeah, it's good. What I think might be missing, because I've talked to a couple of DRAs, so the last weekend, the end of OWL, typically it's like throwing a bunch together in a weekend sleepover, and there was the doll. Did you do OWL?
Well, we did AYS.
Oh, you did AYS,
So,
yeah. Oh, right, it was just switching right after you had switched.
I think so.
Yeah, after it hit the newspapers.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we were like during that.
Yeah. These pictures are terrible. I was like, well, you signed up, and now you're making a big scene in Boston and getting in the newspaper. So, I loved it, and I just had my congregation buy one of these dolls. They are awesome. So it's a doll that is life size, and it looks a lot. I mean, it's pretty good. It's mechanical, and so you do it for the sleepover for the high school kids. You do it for the youth. You do it for the sleepover, and everyone has a turn to take charge of it, and it actually monitors how many times it got shook and all sorts of stuff. And my last OWL weekend at my congregation, one of my favorite moments. I just want to hold this moment because it was so great. I never want to leave. I never want to forget this moment ever. So, like, there's bottles that you can feed. There's all diapers, like the whole thing. And so you're supposed to be in charge. And then the point is basically everyone's like, no, wait, I want to have a baby. We're not going to say, So they're like, this is horrible. It's like way, way better than a pound of flour to be in charge of. So everyone's exhausted. Everyone's miserable. And at the end, I'll tell you the story. At the end, like, you can push this button and out comes like the summary of what happened to this baby. But this one scene, I think it was like 3 a.m. And this one high school student, this one young man who was so sweet and kind of quiet, it was his turn to have the baby. And I remember the other youth advisor and I was the DRE at the time, the director of religious education, were both up, right? And this young man tried everything because the baby cries and stuff. He did the diaper, and it's like 3 a.m. He's like doing the diaper, he's doing this, and then I'll never forget. I turned around and there's also like a breastfeeding like vest thing. He's like doing everything. He was the only boy that put the breastfeeding thing on because no one else would, right? He's by himself. He's like in the corner of the kitchen, like in this old house where Ari's. He's got the breastfeeding and he's just like, he's got the baby up. He's like, please be quiet. And I'm just like, I love this moment. I love this moment. And he was just like but he was really like, I care. And I was like, oh, I love you. This is amazing. So yeah, see if they still have the doll. You used to be able to take it out like library, like take it out from the big UUA world in Boston. And I was like, I'm buying it. I never went to GA. I refused to go to GA because I found out, working and hanging out at youth conferences, that I don't remember what year, how long it was, I only had to hear it once, that the youth got to stay in their own hotel, right? And they're talking about showers. They're laughing, talking about how they're taking showers together and the whipped cream. And that, again, poker face. I'm like, I am just collecting data. I'm just collecting data that I shall do something with later after I really think this through. I refuse to go to GA because I'm like, I cannot participate in that. And even when the minister at the church in Reading, when I was serving as a director of faith development, I did a lot of innovative religious education stuff. And I was recognized for it through the UUA. And my minister was like, they're gonna give us a award, a recognition at GA, and this will be great. I'm like, I'm not going. So I did not go to GA to stand up and receive an award and recognition for the RE program that I created, because I could not support the adults' abandonment. We talk about youth empowerment versus youth abandonment. There's a lot of youth abandonment, and I think that's why it broke down. You got to invest in your youth. It's sincerely, genuinely, and with ultimate respect. The first round of DREs, in my experience, right? So we have to speak from when I stepped in to do all this. So that, with religious education and teaching classes and everything, would be the early 90s, right? That's before, and youth probably stepped in around mid 90s, right? Until 2005, 2006, somewhere over there. So, early 90s to 2006 era. And then jumping back into Star Island this year, 2022, as a youth advisor. So the first vibe, in the most beautiful way, we called those, I don't know who we was, but the first group of more formal directors of religious education were referred to as the Girl Scout leader model. And it was actually great. It was great. And they were all, many were about the same age, same look, and it was kind of funny, and also comforting in a lot of ways. And most were not paid, right? So you think about that. Let's just think about that for a minute. So the children and youth of a church congregation, not worth paying the people who are working their butts off to educate themselves to do a good job because they love children and youth and the denomination, but not getting paid or fully respected, right? That's how Loretta started, which is the group that was organized for religious educators to have support and work together and get maybe even legal counsel, right, to be represented in a fair and equitable manner within our denomination. So anyway, but that comes to the point, right? So you've got these people, mostly but not all women, and the model is the Girl Scout model. And I was a Girl Scout. I was a Girl Scout leader for a little bit, and it's cool. It's like, we're going to do programming, and we have goals, and this is how we're going to do it. And then another group, so we look at generational, like when it shifts and how it shifts. And it's going to shift relative to the times and the culture, the larger culture and all that. So this was the marker, I believe, of the real demise of Blue Channing District. I can only speak to that district because that's the one I was involved in at the time. So we had a leader, a very important leader, and a highly contributing leader in the Director of Faith Development culture in Blue Channing. And it was a conference in Providence, Rhode Island. At the conference, we created, the group, the youth community and the adults created a rules committee, right? So a rules committee can be formed, and typically it's youth and adults on it. A rules committee at a conference means this is the group who agree to take on the hits of crappy stuff, right? So the rest of the community can do their thing, and then it can come, I think, very respectfully, without shame, just like, bring it over here to the rules committee, right? We don't need to bring the drama, we'll handle it. And the youth and the adults will hear it out, talk about it, and create what the action, the consequence will be, right? So in Rhode Island, I think it was 2 youth went off campus. And so at a youth conference, they're typically almost always like on the Friday night, it's like a Friday through a Sunday. Friday night, there will be orientation, mandatory orientation. The rules are like, this is where you can smoke cigarettes. This is where you can do this. Know this, know this. Here is the perimeter. You cannot leave the perimeter because they're in cities or in towns or whatever. This is it. The boundaries are here to here. So at this conference, and there was 2 youth, we caught word that 2 youth had left. No one could find them. Because throughout a conference, oftentimes there are what we call touch groups. And so throughout the day, you meet with your touch group. People would meet together, and then everyone's accounted for, but also inclusivity, checking in with everybody. A conference can be very big and overwhelming, so you come to a small group to feel a part of. So these youth had been missing Saturday and missed their touch groups and everything. So they were off campus somewhere wandering around Providence, Rhode Island. Now this information, based on the understanding and the agreement, would come to the Rules Committee, and then the Rules Committee would discuss. Instead, what I remember and what I experienced was that this prominent adult called the youth's parents and called the police. Did not call the committee together, didn't do any of that. And all of a sudden, it's like this big ruckus. The youth who was chairing the conference, so there were often youth who were leading the conference, who were doing leadership work and working in conjunction with the adults, and may or may not have youth chaplains. So it wasn't just this kind of free-for-all. Youth were learning leadership skills and really taking a lot of pride in what was happening for the week and taking responsibility for it. So the youth who was heading up that conference was like, what's going on? Like, what? Like, this is not, and she was upset. There was more history because both of them came from the same congregation and they had history there. And so this youth confronted this adult and was like, you broke it, blah, 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 blah. And this adult physically pushed the youth. A learning for me was, if I ever get to that place where I feel like I want to push a youth, I need to get out. Because that's my problem. And I'm not in a good place to be doing this work. So it was really interesting to watch. And it was interesting to watch because it was like, and it gets into all sorts of stuff about codependency and enabling, and like, it's like, I say to people, someone can give you a lollipop on Wednesday and then punch you in the face on Thursday, and they don't get to say, and you don't say, and they don't get to say, yeah, but I gave you a lollipop yesterday, so it's okay, I punched you in the face today. It's like, no, it's 2 totally separate things, right? So this person, this adult, was beloved and made big things happen and was really important and da-da-da-da. And consequences for you, adult, because you just pushed a youth. And you're the one who went against the agreement of the community. You did this authoritative decision and didn't trust this committee. So I found that to be really interesting. And I believe, that of course went back to their dynamics and their church community. And I believe that began to be the breakdown, because the story could be how unruly the youth were, and it's like, people pleasing adults. And it's like, no, this is bottom line. It's okay to say this adult, whoa, maybe you need to, I get that you have remorse and you feel bad, sort of. But then it just the story perpetuated. And instead of, I'm really sorry, I don't, blah, 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 it was more like trying to find, no, it was all right that it was okay that I did this. And it's like, no, it was not okay that you did that. And so that broke a lot. And then the word got out. And that, to me, was the big reason Blue Channing disbanded at that time. And then not long after that, maybe a year after that, that youth contacted me and said, I'm the head of Yak, but there is no Yak. They disbanded it. I don't want this to be dropped. Can you help me? What do we do? What do we do? I said, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Somehow we'll figure it out. And so she said, it's like I'm aging out. I have to pass this on. And I was like, Yes. She's like, but there's no weird, no support. So I don't remember how exactly or who it got passed on to, but within that conversation, as that was happening, a youth from Star Island, who was part of Blue Channing, Matt Moore, and his mom, Nan Moore, who was a DRE, who I knew from Star Island, from our RE Week, we were all in a conversation about the rebuild. And from there, we started creating a youth adult committee to rebuild Blue Channing. And that's how that started. But it was not a UUA rebuild. So what we have is a bunch of adults who choose to disband something. And typically what I've seen is youth wanting to rebuild it. And some adults, right? Some adults. So that was really interesting, the rebuild of that. So typically what I've seen is because of youth abandonment, I believe, youth are gonna be youth in a lot of ways. And rules are going to be broken, and sometimes false blame can be put on youth. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's false. And if adults don't understand the community, I think it can be easy for them to say, well, they don't need that. They're acting, it's out of control. They don't need that. Well, who let it get out of control? You know, a lot of church weekends at Ferry Beach, because congregations will go to Ferry Beach for a weekend, and it's a big thing they do. Over the years, through my, again, being a youth advisor at a couple different congregations, a director of faith development, youth advisor at cons, and all of that, I hear the stories. And I hear how youth some of the adults are like drinking, having a great time, and they're not paying attention, and the youth are then all drinking. And then to get angry with the youth, there was a period when congregations were having a discussion, do we have alcohol at our events? Do we lock the cabinets? Do we have alcohol? What are we trying to show? So it's been interesting conversations, and ultimately it really comes down to how invested are you in your youth's health and well-being? And how much effort and time. Years ago, I was reading a book when my children were born. I was trying to be like, I need to find parenting resources, and there's a parenting group on Nantucket, which was great. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad she started it. And I was reading all these books, and this one book, I didn't read the whole book. I grabbed the nugget that I really needed to get in the first couple of chapters, and it said, you can say you love someone, who cares? You can say as much as you want, but to show your child that you love him or her or them is to show them that they're worth your time. That's it. Show them that they're worth your time. And I believe we did not show our youth they were worth our time. And that's how it broke down. It was a joy. And that's the other thing. I didn't need it. And when I teach youth like leadership stuff, I do the UUA's one, but I'm also kind of tough on the adults, to be honest with you. I'm like, listen, you better make sure your needs are met with your adult friends, because you don't come to work with youth to get your needs met. If you have issues because you weren't popular in high school, go to therapy. Am I getting worked up enough? Don't show up and want to be popular with the youth. Not cool, right? If you don't have enough love in your life, don't show up. Don't try to get in a cuddle puddle with the youth. That's creepy and wrong, you know? Take care of yourselves as an adult and show up as a pillar of confidence and strength to mirror back to the youth that they're okay and they're going to be okay. You know, they're perfect as they are, and their growth is important. They're important and they're of value. Show up, because that's a really cool way to be on the planet. You know? Stewardship. You know? So, yeah, I think we lacked that. And I think people didn't understand. And I think there wasn't listening. And it is challenging, you know, like right, how do we even get to be adults doing this kind of work with youth? I did a youth advisor training. One of the ones I did, this is my favorite thing to do, actually. I was sort of like a jerk, but I also loved it. So, you know, we often have expectations of youth, children and youth, that we don't hold adults to. Which is like, what? And we've had time to practice sitting still. And I'm still not that good at it, so I'll be honest. So I was doing this youth advisor training once. I like to go in early, and I look around, I look at all the things that could be weapons, first of all, right? Like, let's not set up our kids. Like, who do you think you're working with? You know, are they? So, you know, so I remember once I came in, and I'm like, oh, there's a paper clip. Oh, with a rubber band right next to it. Awesome setup. You know, and I'm looking around. I'm like, So the adults come in, right? And, you know, they're kind of coming a little late. And there was like coffee and stuff up in there, strangling around. And I'm like, okay, you know, we're starting. And they're starting. And then, you know, my first things, like I'm talking and I have them, I don't really care if they fill out the paperwork. It's not really the point. But the point is, like, how do they fill out the paperwork? So I'm like, oh, if you could just individually fill this out for me, that would be great. And they're all talking. They're not paying attention. They're just like, oh, they're eating donuts. And they're not even talking on point, even about the paper they're supposed to be filling out. I'm like, this is beautiful. I'm so excited to blow this open shortly. And then, like, they do, I go, thank you. And I gather. And then they're getting up and just going to the bathroom, whatever. And I was like, okay, so, these are youth advisors. And I'm like, okay, so I'd like everyone just to walk around the room and tell me if you think this is a good space. Is this space ready for youth to come into? And they're like, yeah, looks good. Yeah, you know. So then I do this cool thing. I love this. So then, like, we do some work. And then I say, all right, now is break time. And I have something for you. And then I take out, like, donuts, right? And they're just all like, they don't know what's going on. And then I look and I go, exactly. You all have been getting donuts over here. You all have been getting, and I say it like in a loving way, but also in an honest way, blah, blah, blah. And when I asked you to fill out your forms, and I said, so I just want to point out to you that when your youth come, what is your expectation that they should be doing? And then they're supposed to wait until you bring the donuts. Like, how did you do with all that? And everyone is usually always like, oh. I go, yes. And it really, because I don't sound as maybe rough as I sound right now. However, I still want to be firm about expectations, and they get it. And they get it. I've never had a group that didn't get it. And then I say, and I also, come with me around this room. Can you walk with me now? And I'm like, look at this. And then I put the rubber band, I'm like, this is amazing. And they're like, oh, I said, right. And look at this over here. And what do you think about this? And then it really opens us up to then get really honest. And then that's when I get into, like, okay, we're going to talk about your high school years. And everyone's like, we're here to, like, I'm like, you're here to be healthy and to be present for youth. So we have to hear. And then, I've always had really good success, and people can get honest. And then I say, well, then these are some things you need to work on, because you can't bring this into the space with youth. Like, you cannot. And I value and honor that was traumatic for you in high school, and I understand that. And I'm happy to be a resource in the future for you to figure that out.
Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. I wanted to jump in here to tell you that we are having a con-inspired connective retreat November 20th to the 22nd on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. This is co-directed by myself and Reverend Jason Leiden, with our weekend musician Matt Meyer. Many of the people you will hear on this podcast plan to be in attendance and even help lead some of the activities. Our registration is now open with a special early bird price. When you head to our website, yruu.org, click on Connective Retreat. It's time to connect. See you there.
I was at, I think ConCon once was at Ware, Massachusetts. I went to that. I think it was probably, I want to say maybe the mid to late 90s. An interesting thing happened at that situation. And I guess this just goes to kind of talking about, So the 5 steps of building community are bonding, opening up, affirmation. We used to call it crisis, step 4, and then we call it stretching, sounds a little better. And then deeper sharing, right? And so that's also part of, we work with leadership. This was a really interesting situation. And then we'll just see how this could quickly overlap and apply to what happened, right? So we say that if you do bonding, if you do opening up, and I think affirmation is, to me, is the thing that we lack the most, which is affirming, really being present. And then crisis will always happen, right? Well, now we call it stretching. At that experience, so there would be this one in particular, there was a super secret activity that was a big plan, and that was like a big thing everybody had to do. It was kind of like mandatory. It was really great, right? And this, the night before, it was mostly youth run, with some adults, of course, but mostly really youth run. And I was just a youth advisor at that one, so I wasn't really in the whole thing. And the youth who was really excited about running the super secret activity. And again, just a side note, it was really great to meet people from all over the country. That was really fun, actually, and have everyone come together. But it also made this crisis really terrible, I think. So he had a great idea, and he was talking to me about it because he was so excited. He's like, oh, do you want to know what the super secret activity is? And I was like, well, only if you want to tell me. So I thought it was a great idea. So the next day, and there's like tons of people, right? Tons of people. And we're broken into these groups. And he says, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna go from each section, you're gonna run to this one place, and the people there are gonna tell you an activity to do. And then when they tell you did it, good enough, that you accomplished it or whatever, you're gonna run to the next one. But meanwhile, while you're running, people are gonna run out and try to hit you with pool noodles. And the goal was to hit all the activity stations, do the activities, and come back. And not get disqualified because you get hit too much by the pool noodles or whatever. So we're all like, that sounds great, And so, and even though he told me kind of what we were gonna do, he didn't really tell me the whole story because I was as innocent in a lot of ways as everybody else. So my group, we run to our first activity, and this was in the summer, remember? So this is summer, and that matters because we're outside running around this big field. So we run to our first activity. I think it might have been we had to make a pyramid, right? So we got to get on top of each other and make this pyramid. And there were 2 youth at each station, and you're supposed to be like, hey, did we do a good job? So we did a pyramid, and our youth were like, no, that's not a good pyramid. And we're like, oh, seems weird. All right, so we did it again. They're like, nope. And then they were ignoring other groups that come and do a pyramid, and then they're like, okay, you can go, but we still couldn't go. And we're like, this is weird. So, and then you see the groups running, and people running out with pool noodles and stuff. So we got to another one of they finally let us go. They're like, we don't care, go ahead. So we go to this other one, and we have to do something with our arms and untangle and unknot, one of those unknotting things, right? And we're kind of doing it, but again, we're getting ignored until we're not doing it right. So one of the youth is like, all right, who cares? Let's just say we're gonna do it. Everyone, they're not watching, and say we did it, right? So we did it, all right. And I was like, well, we cheated, but okay, whatever. We're all like, oh. So then, at some point, I don't know, it's it's over, and there are people, youth are crying because I'm like, what is happening? And my group was fine. like emotionally, we seem like fine, like, and people are crying and people are getting really mad and angry and all this stuff is happening. I think that's why it was like kind of the activity got shut down. So then it's like, big group meeting. We all have to meet and we're in our groups, and then they start telling us like what the activity was. And honestly, I think we were pretty much all white people. All right, we're Caucasian, middle to maybe middle upper class white youth and adults, right? Maybe there were a couple of people of, Black people of color, not a lot, right? So I'm saying that because this is really interesting. That's the next piece I'm going to tell you. So then the youth are in charge, and the youth who was planned the super secret activities, like, okay, like we have to tell you, we're going to tell you what the activity, like what the point was. He said there were like group 1 through 4. So you're either group 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? And there was a bunch of 1s, bunch of 2s, bunch of 4. So he said, some of you were a privileged group. And so the people that you went to, when you went to the activity, they knew by your group number, if you were privileged, you didn't even really have to do it. You could just move on to the next one. And the people with the noodles weren't going to come after you. So it was different levels of privilege. Now, it turned out our group was, I think, 4, like the least privileged. And we didn't even notice. But and so it was like we were supposed to talk about it. And so what we discovered is we cheated. That was sort of our learning. Like, well, we cheated. We got frustrated that we knew they weren't letting us go. It seemed like it was unfair. So we just cheated. Or when they weren't looking, we just left and said we did it. We were like, we don't care. Even if they were like, come back here, we're like, we're not coming back. There's something not right here. So, but within that, there were a bunch of very vocal youth who were like, this was terrible and it was so hot out and we could have really gotten hurt and you really upset me and we should have known what was going on. And it was like a huge, like, big blow up. Interesting. And so it really, I mean, again, it speaks to like, whoa. And I think if Dawn, you and I have seen it Star Island too, RE Week, and we've seen it you can hit some pretty deep stuff. I mean, honest, I thought the activity was brilliant. Like, this is really cool. Give us a chance to experience it. And I discovered I would cheat in that circumstance. And yet it community was like broken. They didn't even know how the rest of the conference was gonna go, and then you had adults who were really angry that it wasn't right and fair and you upset these people. Interesting. So that also speaks to where's the skill level to help something like this. And so remember, you also, if people maybe don't, it's a fine line between confidences, you know what I mean? So this goes back to the adult in Providence who push the youth. If they go back to their congregation, right? So if you don't understand or you're trying to defend yourself. So in that instance, and I wish I could remember what year that was, so how it maybe played out into con issues, I don't know. But under that circumstance, youth could have gone back. Adults certainly could have gone back. Our youth shouldn't go. This was dangerous. This was a terrible activity. And then so you run into that too, right? And I thought the youth did a really good job trying to but also how can you reach everybody at a huge conference and kind of help that. And so did it come to deeper sharing? No, that one did not, that crisis and stretching did not lead to deeper sharing. There was a lot of brokenness that then left that year. And I was not my group was good and we were able to really talk it out. And because the other adult woman was great and that was good. And not everyone was in that place. We had this interesting experience with a youth advisor who was involved across the board. And actually, it was the congregation I was serving who, as the director of faith development, the youth advisor, who I thought, was really great, wonderful, brought someone in who ended up being maybe a little toxic, right? Had some boundary stuff. And so he ended up then serving on the youth adult committee. And I was not on the committee. I don't remember why I was at the meetings. Or maybe I was on the committee. I might have been on the committee or ad hoc or something. I don't remember. Because there's a bunch of it in there. But it was interesting because there was this riff with these adults. And I was like, well, it's really clear this person is like what? So I wasn't there when there was this discussion of what to do about the adults. And part of me is like, fire the volunteer. It's a volunteer. Fire the volunteer. We all kind of know what's happening here. So I'll do it. So then but I'm like, okay, I'm just hanging out, right? Because they're making a decision. So then I get this email from the head of the district. There was always like a DRE was like head of the district of the DREs. So she writes to us on the youth adult committee. Again, I don't remember what my role was. And she says, well, and I wasn't at the meeting. We've come to the decision. We're going to take, I think it was like $600, I want to say. It was something atrocious to me anyway. We're going to take $600 and pay for a mediator for these two adults. Hair on fire as I'm reading it. If I was in the space, I would have been like, Lord Jesus, help me with my poker face. Jesus, Mary, Joseph. That's what it's Irish people, half Irish. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, help me. So I was like, so I'm reading this and I'm like, so then I sort of pulled myself together and I was like, I just want to understand, because I always have to say that. This is what I understand. Am I reading this correctly? That you all have agreed to pay, again, I'm saying $600, I'm not 100% sure, like $600 for a mediator. You're going to take $600 out of the youth budget, the youth adult, but in this district, to pay for these two volunteer adults to get along? But that person, I didn't say, we all know that person is the problem. I was like, I can't support this. I cannot support this. And then I was the one that looked like the jerk. But I was like, I can't. Do you know what $600 could do for our youth? Why are we paying for a poorly behaved adult $600? So, that stuff also. That's some of the advisor stuff, I would say absolutely the majority of advisors that I worked with were really great and within the spectrum of like, okay, this works, this functions, right? This works and we're all learning and da-da-da-da-da. And yeah, then there were a couple that it was like, no, again, you're trying to meet your needs, you're doing youth abandonment, you really don't want to be here, or you don't really understand, or, So yeah, that's some of the challenges, and to see that this period, it's one thing to say like this was the greatest era in time and it had its time and it was supposed to, let's just savor how great it was. Wait, this was something really important and crucial, and why does it no longer exist? How did the profound institutional memory drop this when it comes to our youth? And yes, we had youth in our programs. Yes, there were youth that came to youth groups that I was an adult advisor or a director of faith who were doing heroin, not at youth group, obviously, but yes, there were drug overdoses, there were attempted suicides, all of that was happening, for sure. And youth came together to try to find their way out of it. right? They tried to find their way out of it. Did they also egg each other on sometimes? Yes, absolutely, right? Communities do that. They're no different than adults who do that. So, I find it curious and honestly in a sort of sad curious. I like to be regular curious. And this is sort of a sad curious as to why a denomination that has such great principles and living traditions has nothing of this kind, that didn't advance, it didn't shift, it didn't work out the bugs, to have this for our youth when the trauma and the overwhelm to our youth is just off the charts right now. Off the charts. In my private practice, I often get calls from hospitals and adults by word of mouth. We have a child here that committed suicide. Tried to commit suicide. And can we release them to the care of you? Can you? And it's like, and guess what? It doesn't take long. It doesn't take long to see that youth who was in the hospital for a week for attempted suicide to all of a sudden have a moment like, it's going to be, I'm okay. I joined this club and I did this and I can accept that my brain is different. And it's like, yeah. And we have a denomination that can do that. So why aren't we? It's kind of like the same thing. Young adults, like, what happened there? What happened there? That's a whole but that's the youth into the young adults. So anyway, it was why are you? I would support it, even with the bugs that I know exist. I would say bring it all back. Bring it all back, because the benefits and who it cared for and the purpose and the healing and the survival far outweighs any of the, funky stuff that arose. Right? And then, get some investment and some adult training, to make it rise up. Rise up. It can rise. This is such a great time. I was saying, a lot of these youth were the ones at school that were marginalized. And now, the world has just opened up so much more to acceptance. And boy, we could really, really be leaders. The youth that were attracted to the denomination could really, really be leaders in the world, in their schools and other places. Because that was another part, just to say, leadership development was huge. This wasn't just hang around, do whatever you want. There were moments of that, and sometimes we're going to tighten it up a little. There was a purpose, and there was a point, and there were programs that youth were creating for each other. And yeah, you know what? Here's the other thing. Me on this little riff here. But here's the thing, again, speaking about adult expectations, a youth who shows up at a con and hears that, hey, you want to do a workshop? And they're like, yeah, let me pull it together. And you know what? I don't care if it's on SpongeBob. I don't care. It's a youth that's like, I'm going to step up. And I'm going to take, an hour and a half, 2 hours of my time. And I'm going to find some reason that SpongeBob is some cool, thing that ties into life. And people show up. That's awesome. You know what I mean? Be with what is and dig what is and see what has been brought up and is what? Shining in front. And dig it. Love it. Instead of perhaps, well, this was not a very organized thing. I didn't see there were handouts. But I think that's the judgment piece, right? The judgment piece of meet them where we're at and just have a blast with it.
This podcast was produced by Linden Tree Productions. The interview was conducted by Dawn McKechnie.
Music featured by Scott Murphy and Matt Meyer.
For more information, go to whyareyou.org. That's the question all spelled out. whyareyou.org.
Don't forget our documentary, Why Are You You, is available to watch now by renting or buying it through Vimeo.
Please subscribe and review the podcast. It'll help more folks find this content. Thanks.